Welcome to the channel Tune of Revenge. This 1008 portrait appeared peaceful until historians noticed what the enslaved child held in his hands. Dr. James Crawford adjusted his reading glasses as he examined a de jure type at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. It was February 2024, and he had been cataloging antebellum photographic collections for 8 months. Most images blurred together, stiff poses, formal attire, faces frozen in time by early photography's limitations, but this degree stopped him. The image dated September 1856 showed the Caldwell family of Richmond, Virginia. Mr. Thomas Caldwell stood beside his wife, Eleanor, both in their finest attire. Their 2 daughters, around 10 and 12 years old, wore elaborate white dresses with lace collars. The interior was opulent with heavy velvet curtains, ornate wallpaper, and polished mahogany furniture visible in the background. To the right stood a young black boy, perhaps 7 or 8. He wore simple cotton clothing, barefoot on the patterned carpet. His posture was rigid, his face serious, eyes slightly downcast. The notation on the de jure type identified him as Benjamin. James had seen many photographs like this, while the Southern families posing with enslaved children, displaying them as casually as their fine furniture. It always made him uneasy, but it was part of the historical record he worked to preserve. As he prepared to move to the next image, something caught his eye. Benjamin's hands were in front of his body, fingers loosely clasped. His right hand, however, seemed to be holding something. James leaned closer to the high-resolution scan on his monitor. The image quality was exceptional. Every detail was crisp: threads in the curtains, grain of the wood, even the texture of Benjamin's hair. He zoomed in on the boy's hands. There, partially concealed between his fingers and pressed by his thumb, was a small metal object. In the full portrait it appeared almost invisible, just a shadow magnified. It was unmistakable, a small iron or steel key, the type used in the 1,850s for shekels, manacles, or chains. James sat back, heart pounding. This wasn't just a family portrait. A 70-year-old enslaved child had stood perfectly still for the long exposure, secretly holding a key that his enslavers had clearly not noticed. What did it unlock? How had he obtained it? What did he plan to do? James knew he needed context, documentation, and evidence. Over the next 3 days, he gathered every record he could find about the Caldwell family. The Virginia Historical Society held extensive records. The Caldwells were prominent tobacco merchants in antebellum Richmond. Thomas Caldwell's ledgers meticulously documented transactions and property, including enslaved people. Benjamin appeared as age 7, house servant, son of Rachel Cook and Samuel, field worker, deceased 1854. His father had died 2 years before the photograph, noted simply as deceased. A household inventory from 1856 listed tools and supplies in the basement, including iron restraints, 2 sets, chains, locks for security and discipline. The key Benjamin held could have unlocked these restraints, but why would a 7-year-old risk hiding a key in a formal photograph? Eleanor Caldwell's letters provided more context. One from August 1856 mentioned, "We have had troubles with Rachel's boy, Benjamin Thomas. Says the child is sullen and disobedient, influenced by his mother's grief. Rachel has been difficult since Samuel's passing, though I have tried to be patient. Thomas insists discipline must be maintained. The boy witnessed his father's punishment and has not been the same since. I fear we may need to sell him if his attitude does not improve." James read it 3 times, jaw clenched. Benjamin had seen his father punished. Samuel Uncke's death hadn't been from illness, but violence. 2 years later, Benjamin held the key to shackles. Escape, freeing his mother, revenge. James searched Caldwell records from late 1856 into 1857. He found an entry in Thomas Caldwell's diary, October 12, 1856, discovered theft of basement key, investigated and found evidence of tampering with storage locks. Rachel's boy, Benjamin questioned abject recovered. Severe measures required to maintain order and prevent future incidents. Boy to be sold south immediately. James felt sick. Benjamin had been caught, the key in the photograph. He'd stolen it, hidden it. And whatever Benjamin had planned had been discovered. The consequence was being sold south, separated from his mother, sent to the brutal labor camps of the deep South's cotton and sugar plantations, where enslaved children often did not survive. But there had to be more to the story. What had Benjamin been trying to do? Had he succeeded, even partially, before being caught? And what happened to Rachel? His mother, James, knew his next step. He needed to trace Benjamin's story after 1856 and find out if any descendants of Rachel or Benjamin still existed who might hold pieces of the family's history. He contacted the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, where Dr. Monica Price, a specialist in antebellum slave records, agreed to help. Monica was an expert in tracing the sales and movements of enslaved people through bills of sale, auction records, and plantation ledgers. Being sold south in 1856 was essentially a death sentence for a child. Monica explained, the mortality rate for enslaved children in deep South cotton and sugar plantations was horrific. Many didn't survive their first year. She pulled up digitized records from New Orleans auction houses, the primary market for enslaved people sold from the Upper South to the Deep South. If Benjamin was sold in October 1856 from Richmond, he would have been transported by ship or overland coffles to New Orleans. James watched as Monica navigated through databases containing thousands of names, human beings reduced to ledger entries valued like cattle. After 20 minutes, Monica pointed at her screen. November 1856, New Orleans. Sale record from Templeton and Bradford. Boy Benjamin, age 7, sound health, housed from Virginia estate. Purchased by Mr. Redivo of St. Charles Parish, Louisiana. James felt his chest tighten. A sugar plantation. Monica nodded grimly. One of the largest in Louisiana, known for brutal conditions. The harvest season from October to January was called the grinding. 18-hour days, children working alongside adults, frequent injuries and deaths. Would there be plantation records? Possibly. Many Louisiana plantation records survived the Civil War, or Monica made several calls and finally hung up with a strange expression. James, this is unusual. The DVO plantation records are extensive, held at Ta University, but Benjamin's name appears with a notation, transferred after only 4 months. Transferred where? To a different owner, a free woman of color in New Orleans named Josephine Lauron, who purchased him in March 1857. Free people of color did sometimes own enslaved people, often purchasing family members to protect them. Could Josephine have been family? Monica added, let's investigate further. 3 days later, James was on a plane to New Orleans. Taine's special collections allowed him to examine the original plantation ledgers and the bill of sale for Benjamin's transfer. The documents told a remarkable story. Benjamin had indeed worked on DVO plantation for 4 brutal months during the 1856 grinding. The plantation doctor's log recorded injuries. Boy Benjamin, age 7, burned hand from boiling sugar kettle. November 1856. Lacerations from cane cutting. December 1856. Then in March 1857, a transaction record Benjamin sold Josephine Lauron, free woman of color, New Orleans, for $600 paid in full. Josephine's own records explain the purchase in a letter dated February 1857 to an associate in Richmond. I have received word through our network that Rachel's son is here in Louisiana. Sold to DVO after the incident in Richmond. Rachel has asked if anything can be done. I am making arrangements to purchase the boy. The sum is considerable, but we cannot leave him to die in that hell. I will send word when the transaction is complete. James sat back, stunned. This was not random charity. Josephine Lauron was part of an organized network, possibly the Underground Railroad or similar. Rachel had somehow managed to send word from Virginia to New Orleans, asking for help to save her son. The key Benjamin had held in the photograph was part of a larger story. Back in Virginia, James searched for more on Rachel. He found references in the records of First African Baptist Church in Richmond, one of the few black churches in the antebellum South. The church maintained coded records, including a note, "Rachel provides sustenance to travelers." James knew travelers was often code for freedom seekers using Underground Railroad. Confirmation came from an unexpected source, the diary of Thomas Garrett, a Quaker abolitionist from Philadelphia, held at a Ford College Quaker collection. Garrett had been a conductor on the Underground Railroad. In an entry from 1855, received word from our Virginia contact that 3 souls successfully departed. Richmond, our sister there, continues her dangerous work providing shelter and provisions despite great personal risk. Her husband's recent martyrdom has not diminished her commitment. Could this sister have been Rachel and her husband the martyr mentioned? Could that have been Samuel's death in 1854? James needed more evidence. He contacted Dr. Monica Price again, and together they began piecing together a network map connecting names and locations from various documents. They found that First African Baptist Church in Richmond had been a hub of Underground Railroad activity, with several members quietly helping freedom seekers despite enormous risk. Rachel's name appeared connected to at least 7 successful escapes between 1853 and 185. Then they found a letter that clarified everything, a letter from Thomas Caldwell to Richmond authorities dated September 1856, the same month as the photograph. "I am writing to report suspicious activity among certain members of the African Baptist congregation. My cook Rachel has been observed meeting with individuals of questionable character. Additionally, a key to my basement storage was discovered missing. I have reason to believe there may be a conspiracy to aid runaways. I request investigation and increased vigilance. The pieces fit together. Rachel was helping people escape. Samuel, her husband, had likely been involved, and his punishment in 1854 that led to his death was probably because the Caldwells discovered or suspected his role. Benjamin, at age 7, had witnessed his father's murder for helping others reach freedom. 2 years later, he had stolen a key, not to escape alone, but to continue his parents' work. The photograph from September 1856 captured it. Holding that key just weeks before the Caldwells discovered what he had done. He was 7 years old, standing in that formal portrait, gripping a symbol of resistance while his enslavers smiled, unaware. But what had Benjamin actually done with the key before being caught? James discovered the answer in an unexpected source, the memoir of formerly enslaved woman Harriet Jacobs, published in 1861. While researching at the Library of Congress, James found a passage he had previously overlooked. "In Richmond, I met a woman named Rachel who had helped my escape. She told me of her own sorrows. Her husband killed for teaching others to read, her young son sold away after he unlocked chains meant for runaways, helping 2 souls reach freedom before he was discovered. She never saw her child again. There it was. Benjamin hadn't just stolen a key, he had used it. At 7, he had unlocked shackles and helped 2 people escape before being caught. His punishment was being torn from his mother and sold to near certain death in Louisiana. James returned to New Orleans with a fuller picture. Josephine Loron had not randomly purchased Benjamin. She was part of the same resistance network as Rachel Ann had deliberately saved his life. Attained special collections, James dug deeper into Josephine's papers. Born free in New Orleans in 1820, Josephine had inherited property from her father, a wealthy white merchant who had a relationship with her mother, an enslaved woman he later freed. Josephine had used her freedom and resources to purchase enslaved people, especially children, to free them or protect them until they could be safely freed or moved north. Her account books showed 11 purchases between 1850 and 1860. Including Benjamin. Notations indicated their fates. Freed 1852, freed 1854, relocated to Canada 1855, but next to Benjamin's name residing in household, educational instruction provided, liberation pending suitable age and circumstances. Josephine had kept Benjamin in her home, educated him, and planned to free him when safe. James found letters between Josephine and Rachel, carefully preserved and coded. One letter from Rachel, June 1857. Sister Jake, my heart fills with thanks, knowing my son breathes free air under your care. What he witnessed, what he endured, may God grant him peace. Tell him his father would be proud. Tell him his mother's love crosses every distance. Josephine's reply, August 1857. Sister R, your boy thrives. He learns his letters with remarkable speed, as if making up for lost time. He speaks often of you and his father. The key he carried in his heart has become a key to knowledge. He will grow strong. And one day, when the chains fall from all our people, he will be ready. James felt tears in his eyes. Benjamin had survived. Against all odds, he had been rescued, educated, and freed. But what happened to him afterward? And what about Rachel, still enslaved in Virginia? James found more letters. Spanning the next 4 years, Josephine continued educating Benjamin, teaching him to read and write, and training him in her business affairs. By 1860, at age 11, Benjamin showed exceptional aptitude and determination to help others. Then came the Civil War. In 18, Union forces captured New Orleans, effectively ending slavery in the city under Union occupation. Josephine's records from 1862 included a formal manumission for Benjamin, though. He had effectively been free in her household for years. Benjamin, aged 13, formerly enslaved in Virginia, hereby granted full freedom and legal protection as a free person of color in the city of New Orleans. Notations indicated he immediately sought work with Union forces, first as a messenger, then assisting chaplain and teachers, establishing schools for formerly enslaved people. At 13, Benjamin was continuing his parents' legacy, helping others gain the education and freedom that had cost his father's life. But questions remained. What happened to Rachel? Had mother and son reunited? And what became of Benjamin after the war? The next phase of research would take James back to Virginia and then Washington, tracing both their stories through the war and Reconstruction. As he prepared to leave New Orleans, James looked once more at the 1856 daguerreotype, 7-year-old Benjamin, standing rigid in the Caldwell mansion, secretly clutching a key he would use to free the people before being torn from his mother and sent to Louisiana. Yet he had survived, rescued, educated, and freed. The key in his hand had been literal and symbolic, a key to resistance, knowledge, and freedom. Benjamin's story was far from over. Back in Virginia, James searched for Rachel after Benjamin was sold. Caldwell family records showed she remained a cook through 8 Wednesday night, with notations indicating she was sullen and uncooperative after her son's sale. Unsurprising, given she had her child ripped away as punishment for his act of resistance. Then in April 1861, everything changed. The Civil War began with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter. Richmond became the Confederacy's capital and a military hub. Caldwell household records became sporadic, but James found references to Rachel in other sources. Records from First Tapperton Baptist Church showed that Rachel continued attending services throughout the war, and the church became even more active in resistance work once the war began. James discovered something extraordinary in the papers of Elizabeth Vanloo, a Richmond woman who had run a Union spy ring from her home during the war. Vanloo's coded records preserved at the Virginia Historical Society contained references to informants and helpers in Richmond's black community. One entry from 1863 read, "Our sister at the Caldwell House continues providing intelligence regarding Confederate supply movements. For position in the household grants valuable access." Rachel had become a Union spy. James found confirmation in Union Army records. Major General Benjamin Butler, who commanded Union forces in Virginia, had maintained a list of Richmond civilians providing intelligence to the Union. Rachel's name appeared with a notation. Cook in Confederate household provided consistent and reliable information regarding troop movements and supply chains. information contributed to Union military success in the region. Rachel hadn't just mourned her stolen son and murdered husband. She had fought back using her position in the Caldwell household to undermine the system that destroyed her family. The Civil War ended in April 165 with Richmond's fall. James found Rachel's name in Freedmen's Bureau records from May 1865. Rachel, age 39, formerly enslaved by Caldwell family, seeking information regarding son Benjamin, last known to be in Louisiana. She had survived, and her first act upon gaining freedom was to try to find her son. James knew from his research in New Orleans that Benjamin was alive and working with freed people in 1865, but had Rachel found him? Had they reunited? The answer came from an unexpected source. While researching in Richmond's Black History Museum, James found a collection of letters donated by descendants of First African Baptist Church members. Among them was a letter dated October 1865, written by Benjamin to the church's pastor, Reverend John Jasper. Reverend Jasper, I write to share joyous news. My mother, Rachel, arrived in New Orleans last week, having traveled by steamboat from Richmond after receiving word of my location through the Freedmen's Bureau. We embraced for the first time in 9 years. She wept to see me, grown to a young man of 16. I wept to finally hold her again. The years of separation cannot be reclaimed, but we are together now and both free. My mother tells me of my father's courage and of her own work helping others during the war. I'm proud to be their son. We plan to remain in New Orleans, where I continue teaching in the Freedmen schools. Mother will join the work as well. James sat back, overwhelmed with emotion. They had found each other after 9 years of separation, after Samuel's murder, after Benjamin's near death in Louisiana. After Rachel's years of dangerous resistance work, they had survived and reunited. But the story was not yet complete. James continued tracing their lives during Reconstruction. He traveled to New Orleans to search for records of Benjamin's and Rachel's activities. The city's Freedmen's Bureau records were extensive. As New Orleans had been a major center for educating formerly enslaved people, he found Benjamin's name repeatedly in school records from 1865 to 1870. By age 16, he was already teaching literacy to adults and children. By 18, he had become head tier at a Fremen school in the NA neighborhood, one of the oldest African American communities in the United States. Rachel's name appeared in the same records. She had worked alongside her son, teaching domestic skills and literacy, formerly enslaved women and helping them navigate their new freedom. James found further evidence of their activism. Both Benjamin and Rachel were listed as members of the Louisiana Equal Rights League, an organization founded by free people of color and formerly enslaved people to fight for civil rights, voting rights, and equal treatment under the law. Meeting minutes from 1867 recorded Benjamin Mint giving a speech later reported in the New Orleans Tribune. I stand before you as proof that the chains which bound our people could never bind our spirits. At 7 years old, I held a key, a small piece of metal that I used to unlock shackles and help 2 souls reach freedom. I was punished terribly for that act. I was torn from my mother's arms and sent to die in the cane fields. But I survived. I survived because people in this community, people like Josephine Loron, who gave her resources to purchase and free enslaved children, refused to let me perish. I survived because my mother, still enslaved in Virginia, moved heaven and earth to save me. And I survived because my father, murdered for teaching people to read, taught me that knowledge is the truest freedom. That key I held as a child was real, but it was also a symbol. Every book we open is a key. Every word we teach is a key. Every right we claim is a key that unlocks the chains they tried to bind us with. We are free now, but freedom means nothing without equality, without justice, without the power to shape our own destinies. This speech received a standing ovation and was reprinted in abolitionist newspapers across the North. James felt the weight of Benjamin's journey from the 7-year-old boy frozen in a D
Juror type holding a key to the 8 young man declaring that the fight for freedom was far from over. James continued tracing their lives through the 1870s and 1880s. Benjamin married Catherine in 1872, and they had 4 children. He continued teaching and became involved in a Republican Party politics during Reconstruction, advocating for black voting rights and representation. Rachel lived with Benjamin's family, helping raise her grandchildren and continuing to teach. Finally, James found Rachel's obituary from 1889 in the New Orleans Tribune. Mrs. Rachel, age 63, passed peacefully surrounded by family. Born into slavery in Virginia, she was known for her courage during the antebellum years. Rachel had helped numerous freedom seekers escape bondage at great personal risk. Her husband Samuel was killed for teaching enslaved people to read. Her son Benjamin was sold away at age 7 after using stolen keys to help 2 people escape slavery. Separated for 9 years, mother and son reunited after the war and spent the remainder of her life teaching and uplifting the freed community. She survived through her son Benjamin for grandchildren and countless students whose lives she touched. She often said the key to freedom was education and dedicated her life to proving it. Benjamin lived until 1914, dying at age. His obituary listed extraordinary accomplishments: founder of 3 schools for black children in New Orleans, service in the Louisiana State Legislature during Reconstruction, author of 2 books on education and civil rights, and mentor to hundreds of students who themselves became teachers and leaders. One detail struck James most. Benjamin was known to keep a small iron key in his desk, which he said was a reminder of where he came from and why education mattered. He told his students it was the first key to freedom he had ever held, and that every lesson they learned was another key in their hands. Benjamin had kept that key his entire life, the same key visible in the 156D Jure type, the key he had used at age 7 to free 2 people, the key that had cost him everything and ultimately led to his survival and purpose. James knew the story wasn't just historical. It lived on through Benjamin's descendants. The obituary mentioned for children. Could any of their descendants still be in New Orleans? He contacted Dr. Kendra Williams, a genealogist specializing in African American family histories in Louisiana. When James explained his findings, Kendra was immediately interested. Benjamin's last name, James explained, had become Freedman after emancipation. Chosen symbolically, Kendra searched census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and death certificates, building a family tree extending from Benjamin and Catherine's 4 children, Marcus, Sarah, Thomas, and Ruth, down through 5 more generations. 3 weeks later, Kendra called with news. I found them. Benjamin Freeman has living descendants in New Orleans. His great-great-great-granddaughter is Denise Freeman Carter. She's a principal at a public elementary school. James flew to New Orleans immediately. Denise Freeman Carter was a woman in her mid-50s with warm eyes and a commanding presence. They met at her school, where photographs of historical black educators lined the hallways. Among them was a photo. James recognized Benjamin Freeman in his later years standing with students. That's my great-great-great-grandfather, Denise said proudly. Growing up, we heard stories about him, how he'd been enslaved as a child, separated from his mother, survived somehow, and returned to dedicate his life to education. That story was passed down through every generation. Education was our family's legacy, our resistance, our power. James showed her the 1856 daguerreotype. Denise stared at it, hand over her mouth. That's him. She whispered, Benjamin, as a child, my God. Look how small he was. James zoomed in on the boy's hands. Look here. See what he's holding. Denise leaned closer, and when she saw the key, tears filled her eyes. That key? She asked. James explained. It was the key that got Benjamin sold away from his mother. He had stolen it from the Caldwell family basement and used it to unlock shackles, freeing 2 people. At age 7, Denise sat down overwhelmed, 7 years old, and he risked everything to free others. Just like his father and mother did, James showed her everything, the letters between Rachel and Josephine Lauron, Benjamin's 1867 speech, Rachel's obituary, Benjamin's own obituary, mentioning that he kept the key his entire life. Do you know what happened to the key? Denise asked quietly. James shook his head. I haven't found any record of it after Benjamin's death in 1914. It may have been lost or kept by one of his children. Denise stood, then returned 10 minutes later carrying a small old wooden box. This box has been passed down in our family for generations. It was Benjamin's when my grandmother died. She left it to my mother and my mother gave it to me. She said it represents who we are. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in aged cloth, was a small iron key. James stared, barely breathing. That's it. That's the key from the photograph. Denise lifted it carefully. We always knew this key was important, but the details got fuzzy over generations. We knew Benjamin had been enslaved, separated from his mother, and became a teacher, but we didn't know about the photograph or exactly what the key had been used for. This key unlocked chains. It freed 2 people. It cost my great-grandfather his childhood, and he kept it for 60 years. As a reminder, your family, James said, has kept the physical key and the metaphorical one. 5 generations of educators, all descendants of a boy who risked everything for freedom. 6 months later, James stood in the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, watching visitors move through the special exhibition, The Key to Freedom, Benjamin Freeman's Story of Resistance and Education. The exhibition opened with the original 1856 jure displayed prominently. Visitors first saw what appeared to be a typical antebellum family portrait. A wealthy white family in a formal setting with an enslaved child included as property. The next panel enhanced the image, zoomed in on Benjamin's hands. The key was unmistakable, clearly visible. The exhibition text explained, at 7 years old, Benjamin stole this key from the basement of the Caldwell Mansion in Richmond, Virginia. He used it to unlock shackles, helping 2 people escape slavery before being discovered. His punishment was to be sold south to Louisiana, separated from his mother, Rachel, and sent to work in brutal conditions that killed most children within a year. Benjamin survived, and this key became a symbol of resistance that he carried for the rest of his life. Subsequent panels told the full story. Samuel's murder for teaching enslaved people to read Rachel's work with the Underground Railroad. Benjamin's rescue by Josephine Lauron. The mother and son's reunion after 9 years. Their work during Reconstruction and Benjamin's legacy as an educator and civil rights advocate. One wall displayed letters between Rachel and Josephine showing the network that had saved Benjamin. Another section of the exhibition featured Benjamin's 1867 speech about keys and freedom. His words enlarged on the wall. The centerpiece, however, was a glass case containing the key itself, the very key from the 8-in-56 daguerreotype on loan from Denise Freeman Carter. Visitors lined up to see it, a small piece of iron that carried immense significance. Beside it was Benjamin's 8090 photograph, showing him as a teacher surrounded by students, followed by images spanning 5 generations of Freeman family, educators, including Denise herself, with her own students. The final section was interactive, inviting visitors to explore other antebellum photographs that might conceal hidden stories of resistance. James and his team had analyzed dozens of similar portraits, uncovering small acts of defiance, a woman wearing forbidden jewelry, a man with a book partially visible in his pocket, children positioned to block overseers' views. Every formal portrait of the era was staged to present slavery as benign, but resistance leaked through subtle signs in what people held, wore, or hid. Benjamin's key was the most dramatic example. Yet, the exhibit encouraged visitors to look closer at every image, document, and object, reminding them that hidden stories of courage are everywhere, waiting to be discovered. The exhibition became one of the museum's most visited news outlets, covered it extensively. Documentary filmmakers began developing Benjamin's story for television, and schools across the country requested traveling versions. For James, the most meaningful moment came when Denise brought her students to see it. 30 elementary school children, ages 7 to 10, the same age as Benjamin in the photograph, stood before the image of their principal's ancestor, staring at the small hand clutching that forbidden key. One little girl raised her hand. Miss Denise, was Benjamin scared? Denise knelt. Yes, baby, he was terrified. He had just witnessed his father killed for helping people. You knew if he was caught with that key, terrible things would happen. But he did it anyway because 2 people needed help, and he had the power to help them. That's brave, the girl whispered. It is brave, Denise agreed, and you know what? Benjamin was your age, 7 years old, just like some of you. He proved that even children have power, even in the darkest circumstances. He used that power to free others, and when he grew up, he used it to teach, to fight for rights, to build a better world. She stood before the class. That's why he became a teacher and why your parents sent you to school. Education is still Keith, most powerful key there is. Benjamin knew that. His father believed it. His mother fought for it. And now all of you hold that key every time you open a book, every time you learn something new, every time you use knowledge to make a difference. Over the next 2 years, the exhibition traveled 2 museums nationwide. In Richmond, where Benjamin had been enslaved and his father murdered, thousands visited. The Virginia Historical Society created a permanent display about the Caldwell family and the people they had enslaved, presenting the brutal reality of slavery instead of the myth of genteel Southern culture. In New Orleans, where Benjamin had survived against all odds, the exhibit coincided with the school dedication, Benjamin Freeman Elementary in the TMA neighborhood. Denise spoke. My great-great-great-grandfather spent his life proving that the key to freedom is education. He held a literal key at 7 and used it to free the people. He held metaphorical keys his entire life, books, lessons, knowledge, and used them to free thousands. Now his name is on this school, reminding every child that they too hold keys. They have the power to unlock doors, break chains, and free themselves and others. James continued his research, publishing a book on Benjamin's story, to critical acclaim. More importantly, the story sparked a movement. Historians, genealogists, and archivists began systematically analyzing antebellum photographs for hidden acts of resistance. They found dozens of enslaved people wearing forbidden colors, holding forbidden objects, or positioned to convey silent protests. Each photograph revealed people who refused to be reduced to property, maintaining their humanity and agency, even in images designed to deny both. Museums began highlighting these stories. School curricula incorporated them. The narrative of slavery shifted from passive victimhood to active resistance, from eraser to recognition, from silence to voice. 5 years after James first zoomed into Benjamin's hands to see the key, he received an email from a teacher in Chicago. She had taken her class to see the traveling exhibition. One of her 7-year-old students had been deeply moved and asked, "What is my key? What power do I have to help others like Benjamin did?" The class discussed it and decided, kindness is a key, knowledge is a key, courage is a key. They now talk about using their keys whenever they help someone stand up for what is right or learn something difficult. Benjamin's story from 168 years ago was teaching children how to be better people today. Denise wept when James shared the email. That's exactly what Benjamin wanted, she said, for his story to inspire others, for that key to keep opening doors long after he was gone. The original daguerreotype remained at the Smithsonian with high-quality reproductions sent to schools and museums worldwide. The image of 7-year-old Benjamin, rigid and formal, secretly holding a key, became a reminder that resistance has always existed. Courage has no age limit, and even in the darkest moments, people found ways to fight back. The Freeman family legacy continued. Denise's daughter became a teacher, her son a civil rights lawyer. Benjamin's descendants spread across the country, all aware of their family history and the legacy of resistance and education that began with a 7-year-old boy who risked everything for freedom. James often thought back to that moment in February 2024 when he first zoomed into Benjamin's hands. How is Ollie the key could have been missed? How is Ollie the story could have remained buried in archives, but it hadn't. The key had been found, the story told, and Benjamin's legacy now lives on, not just in history books, but in classrooms across the country where children learn that they too hold keys, they too have power, and they too can help unlock chains that still bind people today. The photograph said, intended to showcase the Caldwell family's well, had become a testament to the courage of the child they tried to treat as property. Benjamin's rigid posture, his small hand clutching that forbidden key, spoke a truth Caldwell's never intended. The people they enslaved were not passive, not defeated, not property. They were human, resisting, fighting, holding keys and metaphoric land, unlocking doors slaveholders had tried desperately to keep closed. Benjamin Freeman's key had freed shekels in 1856. In 2024, it was still opening minds, breaking chains, and teaching new generations that knowledge is freedom. Education is power and resistance is essential. The key remained in its case at the Smithsonian, a small piece of iron that had changed everything. Everyday visitors stood before it seeing not just a historical artifact but a reminder. We all hold keys, and the question is not whether we have powered, is whether we have choose.